This is Plant-Based Briefing. Are plant-based milks imitations? No way. By Nigel Barrella at the Good Food Institute at gfi.org. And I'm your host, Marian Erickson, and this is the 10-minute curated content plant-based podcast where I narrate a variety of articles with author permission on topics related to healthy, compassionate, and sustainable living every weekday. I selected today's post specifically because today is World Milk Day, and the dairy industry continues to lose market share to plant-based milks, as more and more people are choosing these options compared to animal-based milks for a variety of reasons, including the fact that they're cruelty-free, they're better for the environment, better for your health, and some people just don't want to drink the breast milk of another species. Today's article is from the Good Food Institute. They're an international nonprofit, and they're reimagining meat production in order to change the global food system, making it better for the planet, people, and animals. They understand that with alternative proteins, we can mitigate the environmental impact of our food system, decrease the risk of zoonotic disease, and ultimately feed more people with fewer resources. Now let's get to today's plant-based briefing. Are plant-based milks imitations? No way, by Nigel Barrella at the Good Food Institute at gfi.org. GFI submitted comments to the FDA pushing back on a National Milk Producers Federation proposal to label plant-based dairy products as imitation milk. Plant-based dairy products, and especially plant-based milks, have gained wide popularity with consumers in recent years. As of 2019, plant-based milks accounted for 14% of U.S. retail milk sales, and other segments of the plant-based dairy market, such as yogurts and cheese, are growing more rapidly still. The National Milk Producers Federation, or NMPF, has viewed plant-based dairy as a threat to their cow-based market share for decades. They have stepped up their lobbying in recent years, pleading for the government to step in and obstruct plant-based dairy producers through onerous regulation. For years, they have argued for label censorship, a ridiculous argument that products like soy milk and almond milk should not be called by their common names because they do not contain milk from cows. The FDA and the courts have not taken these arguments seriously. In a 2019 citizen petition to the FDA, NMPF proposed a new approach, a complicated amendment of the FDA's regulation for imitation foods to force plant-based dairy products to be labeled as imitations of cow's milk. Under this regulation, instead of soy milk and almond milk, consumers would see products rebranded with the purposefully obscure and inaccurate term imitation milk. This week, GFI submitted a comment to the FDA pushing back on NMPF's proposal. We were pleased to be joined by the Plant-Based Foods Association and 7 plant-based dairy producers. NMPF's proposal is wrong on the law and the facts. Plant-based dairy is not an imitation of cow-based dairy. Plant-based dairy products are entirely distinct in their own right and have been around for centuries all around the world. What are imitation foods? The 1938 Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act contains a provision that requires all foods that are imitations of other foods to be labeled imitation blank. Fill in the blank with the food being imitated. As the FDA explained in 1973, this provision is intended to protect consumers from uninformed purchases of inferior substitute products which could be mistaken for other products. For example, in a 1951 case, the Supreme Court considered a watered-down strawberry jam in which strawberries were replaced with cheap filler ingredients, pectin, and sugar. Plant-based milks obviously are not watered-down cow's milk masquerading as pure cow's milk. They are clearly labeled as standalone products that consumers choose on their own merits as an alternative to cow's milk. And as modern food production has made our food system more diverse, courts have further narrowed the scope of imitation, finding, for example, that non-dairy creamers are not imitation cream, but separate and distinct products. NMPF's petition ignores this history with nonsensical results. As GFI's comment points out, the history and purpose of the imitation foods provision is based on the cheapening and counterfeiting of products, not on giving consumers new products that they value, and this history permeates every aspect of the FDA's imitation regulation. For example, for one food to be considered an imitation of another, the FDA requires that the food have a reduction in essential nutrients compared to the other food, what the regulation calls nutritional inferiority. The word reduction itself implies a modification of the food in some way, reflecting the history of imitation foods as cheap modifications or dilutions. By contrast, two completely distinct foods like peanut butter and almond butter, canola oil and soybean oil, or cow's milk and soy milk are not modifications of each other. They have different levels of nutrition. For example, soy milk has more iron, while cow's milk has more potassium. By NMPF's logic, each food has a reduction of nutrients compared to the other, and each food is nutritionally inferior to the other. This makes no sense because comparing two distinct foods was never the goal of the imitation provision. NMPF's proposal infringes free speech. This proposal picks winners and losers in the marketplace and declares the animal-based dairy to be the winner, exempting animal-based products like goats and sheep's milk from imitation labeling altogether. It is a transparent attempt to target plant-based dairy producers for daring to compete with animal-based dairy for market share. And the proposed requirements for plant-based dairy either label the product imitation or declare its inferiority to animal-based dairy on the label is an unconstitutional infringement of producers' First Amendment free speech rights. For one thing, it is factually wrong. Plant-based dairy is neither imitating nor inferior. Plant-based dairy products have nutritional benefits including lower calories, saturated fat and sugar, lactose, and many of these products are fortified and considered equivalent or better than cow-based dairy. And under the First Amendment, a producer can't be forced to carry its competitor's message disparaging the producer's own product, which is exactly what NMPF's imitation proposal would require. We're continuing our fight for fair label regulation. To ensure fair competition and maximize consumer choice, the words we use matter. With this comment to the FDA, GFI is continuing our fight to build a fair regulatory framework for plant-based foods and alternative proteins as a whole. You just listened to Are Plant-Based Milks Imitations? No Way by Nigel Barrella at the Good Food Institute at gfi.org. And I'm your host, Marian Erickson, and this is Plant-Based Briefing. Thanks for listening.